Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I think I see some people trickling in. So thanks for joining our session. I'm just going to briefly, we have limited time. We have awesome speakers today, so I am going to jump right in, and then I'll introduce myself, and then I'll let Jeff and Rosalyn introduce themselves as well. While we're doing introductions, if you guys could just type in, your role, so we could, maybe even just tailor some of our responses to your role, and maybe even your favorite lyric from the RevGenius song that dropped today. Jeff, Rosalyn, and I were just sharing how many times we've heard that today. So. My name is Aubrey Morgan, and I'm the Director of Demand Gen RevOps at a company called Syncari, and that'll probably come up a few times in this session. Just a little bit of background about me. I've spent my entire career in ops. I was in marketing ops and now in RevOps. And prior to my current role at Syncari, I spent about 7 years in the integration space at a company called MuleSoft. So I come to this conversation with a pretty deep understanding of both the problems that occur when organizations are trying to make sense of their data, particularly when they're providing, various views of the customer, and also what good looks like when a company who has gotten through the challenge of what we call data chaos and are now emerging on the other side, being able to be a bit more proactive with their planning and also with their entire revenue engine. I'll talk a lot about this. It's going to come up a lot today, but let me pass it off to Rosalyn. Would you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So thank you, Aubrey. So hi, I'm Rosalyn. I'm Elena. I'm currently the Vice President of Global Revenue Operations at Neo4j. Similar to everyone else, we are in planning mode for next year, but because I'm relatively new to my role, I'm about 3 months in, I am laser focused on really building out a plan for our overall operations function and team to sort of get us into a healthy state. So data obviously will play a big role in that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of RevOps people on this call as well. So Rosalyn's amazing, and I'm excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Super excited.
Yeah. Jeff, do you want to quickly tell us about yourself as well?
Sure. I've had a blended career like many folks in RevOps, long, windy stations, picking up different skills and experiences along the way. But first started my career working for media and entertainment at Accenture, configuring SAP. So the intersection of business and technology to solve real world problems. Was then an account executive for several years before going to the dark side, going to business school, and then working in finance, supporting sales at Intel and at Google. And then the last several years I've been at startups, building revenue operations teams from the ground up with the mandate of double revenue every year for 4 years straight. And now I host a podcast that's focused on revenue operations practitioners called The Revenue Architect. It's a sibling podcast to Rosalyn's own podcast called The Revenue Engine.
Awesome. Yeah, both amazing podcasts, by the way. I'm a big fan. Jeff, just have to let you know that the chat has really gone off the rails and some Dodger trash talking. So I feel like you asked for it with that background. I warned you. But yeah, so I think as we begin, just a bit of context, just to set the conversation up for today. The digital shift. We all know that customer expectations are changing rapidly, and there's been a digital shift that has happened over the course of the pandemic that was going to happen anyways, but happened more rapidly as a result of the pandemic. And some of those elements of this shift are here to stay. I did a session earlier this morning about the next normal where I talked a lot about this. So what does this mean for our revenue engines and how we operate today? Well, first and foremost, it means that the data, there's more data available at our disposal, and often more systems that are generating that data that need to be connected together. So there's a lot of challenges that come out of this. The first challenge is being able to get access to that data, every team being able to get the right access to the right data at the right time. The second challenge is that there's a tremendous pressure being applied on leadership to leverage that data to make efficient to efficiently grow their business despite the rapidly changing requirements. So it's a combination of efficiency and agility that we really, really understand now. And I think we're just beginning to uncover how we're going to get there. And then the final challenge I'm going to throw out there is that there's this overwhelming feeling of data distrust that's emerging across the organization. We actually did a survey alongside RevGenius, and we've configured that into a report that I will share in the chat. But 96% of C-levels don't have complete trust in their go-to-market dashboards today. That's a huge number, but anyone in ops probably not surprised to hear that. And another stat that's also not surprising, but sad, is 97% of ops pros spend up to half their week manually managing data. So this is a problem. It's widely recognized. And so that's kind of what we're here to discuss today. So Rosalyn, I'm going to kick it off to you first. In your opinion and your experience, why is revenue data in such a chaotic state right now?
Oh boy. Okay. So I think so a number of reasons, but I think as a starting point, the overall revenue process I think is more and more complex, right? As the buyer journey becomes more complicated. And with this explosion of technology that we've had, it only adds to that complexity. I mean, literally there is a tool or a system or an app for every single part of the revenue process. And the need to try to keep that data in sync is critical, but it's so difficult, right? It's always changing with so many inputs, so many systems, and so many people, right, touching it. I think the other challenge is that, a data strategy is oftentimes an afterthought, right? Organizations know they want data, so they go and look for data, they gather data, we even pay for data, right? Without necessarily having sort of that overall strategy or perspective on how the data is actually going to be used, right? How it's going to be governed, how it's going to be maintained, who's going to sort of look over that. And so I think things just get quickly out of control.
It makes a lot. That makes a lot of sense. Jeff, what does this mean for business?
Well, for the business, it's all about how do you create this? How do you make decisions, and what actions do you take from those decisions? So I boil it down to two things: opportunity cost and credibility. These two things are on the line. So if you can't trust the data, oftentimes it can be mistakenly conflated with not trusting the operations teams. Mm-hmm. This is truly bad for business, because operations and the frontline revenue teams are partners. They're the dynamic duo. And so personally, there's nothing worse than dysfunctional partnerships. Real world examples. As you're going through your annual plan, it's October. If you're not planning right now and you're on fiscal, you're in deep trouble. But if you're planning, you really want to have the right data for the right situations. So for example, what are you doing about your existing accounts? What are you doing to grow the base, to mitigate churn in a real world like? Secondly, for these new accounts, new segments you're going after, new markets, if you don't have the data to provide the right insights, and you're muscling your way to the data, and you're just not able to get insights at scale, you're putting yourself in a tough spot, because now you're operating in a business environment where you're truly walking through a fog of war. So the better capabilities you can unleash upon your data stack, your insights engine, and your decision-making processes at the table, you want to make sure that you're partners and you've earned that seat at the table, particularly if you're in RevOps.
That makes a lot of sense. One thing I did want to I guess I'm going a little off script here, but you did mention annual planning. And I think one thing that we're also recognizing as a result of the pandemic was that, I think we all came into 2020 with an annual plan that had to shift dramatically, right? And so I think access to real-time data and being able to adjust that plan and not just stick to it for the year, it's guidance, right? But I think we've learned that we have to be able to take in data in real time and make changes to that plan as a result of what we're seeing in the market.
I think my dog is feeling a little passionate about the pandemic as well. I don't know if you heard that, but dogs' NPS scores are way up.
Yeah. Here. I hope my dog doesn't have anything to say. So let's talk about the ideal state of revenue data. Jeff, I'm going to kick it back to you. What is your ideal state with revenue data, and what's preventing you from achieving that today?
So put some thought into this question, and I like to think of a three-legged stool. There are three basic tenets of what information should provide. One, it should meet these three objectives. So first, it's served to the correct audiences. So for many companies that are looking for how to be myopic or focused on the information that's provided, particularly for highly regulated or sensitive private environments, you want to make sure that the data is getting to the right place at the right time. Second, it's easily digestible. It's not just a data pack that's just dumped onto your audiences. You're taking the time to put something thoughtful together that folks can consume and readily extrapolate what to do next. The third thing is, I meant four pillars. Third is low calorie production, meaning that it doesn't take a ton of time or effort and muscling your way into into creating the energy insights. And then fourth, it's expeditious, right? So you're making sure that you have a request and you're starting to answer those questions, and you're not answering it late or close to the finish line. You want to make sure that it has those four elements. So serves the correct audiences, it's easily digestible, it's low calorie production, and four, it's expeditious.
Awesome. And then Rosalyn, what are you seeing emerge as best practice here?
So I guess going back to that data strategy of how the data will be governed, teams that have clear policies and processes around the data, I think will do better. Right. So what does this mean? Right. This means, having a data dictionary. Right. We talk about that a lot. Right. Having those clear definitions of the data. It means having those clear data policies around sort of the who, what, when, where, and how, right, of the data. Who's responsible for what data, when, and in what system or systems, and what the data should be used for. I think having, kind of goes all back to process, right? Having that defined process for how data gets updated, how it gets maintained, how it gets governed, and making sure that the right people have the right data at the right time. I just want to make a comment about what Jeff was saying about that revenue data being ideal state. My ideal state is I have this magic wand and I just kind of wave it, and then it's all clean and it's all up to date and ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's all of our magic state.
I'm just waiting for an Alexa command. Say, hey,
I
Alexa,
know.
what's my head
Amazon?
count?
Yeah, Syncari's building a synapse for that. So
that's right.
Stay tuned. Great. So I just cautious of time. So, and I see that Asia mentioned this, but if there are questions in the chat that we are not able to get to, we will follow up afterwards and sounds like there will be a thread on Twitter as well. So let's talk about the path forward. Rosalyn, actually, both of you are relatively new to your roles. Rosalyn, you're relatively new to Neo4j, and how did you go about identifying where to get in your bid to tame the data chaos as a new employee?
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of yikes. This is a work in progress for sure, right? I think to your point earlier about those survey results, I would say we are no different, right? We are absolutely in that state of trying to move from, data chaos to data nirvana, right? Until that wand is available, we're doing it through through brute force, right? And hard work. I think the best approach with anything, right, is you come in, you assess the current state, you identify where you want to be, and then you start to identify the gaps, right? From there, you can start to build that get well plan to really start to close those gaps. But as I always say, going back to what are we trying to achieve, right? What are our goals? What's our strategy? And then what is the data and the insights needed to support that? And that helps me kind of get to, where I want to be versus where I'm at, and then all the stuff that has to happen in between.
Is that one big initiative, or is that...
So In a lot of respects, it's one big initiative because you are looking at end to end, right? That's one of the benefits and the challenges of RevOps is you're looking at really that end to end customer journey. So I'm literally like mapping out what does that look like from top of funnel interest all the way through, you know, becoming a prospect, becoming a customer, and then sort of what that closed loop process looks like to really renew and expand into your customer base. So at each of those touch points, there's a full set of sort of what is the right data that we need at those points in time, right? And then how does that data get into our systems and how does that sort of flow? So it goes along with systems and data, but then obviously, again, back to process.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I think Jeff, just kind of, how long have you been at AWS now?
I just joined AWS about 3 months ago.
3 months,
yeah.
Yeah, so I was making sure because I was like, I'm pretty sure you started there not too long ago. But so yeah, I guess what are you seeing? I mean, this is like a massive organization, as you mentioned before. You were at startups. You actually went from big tech to startup back to big tech. So the transition, you've probably seen a little bit of everything with when it comes to data management. What have you seen as like emerge as best practice as people start to work more cross-functionally, and how have you addressed that?
Yeah, keep my commentary in general to those who work in environments, both large and small, for cross-functional environments, not necessarily AWS. Personally, I'm thrilled that companies are becoming more cross-functional. It breeds diversity with information sharing. It breeds innovation, right? So that's the first thing I would say. But there's a price to pay for that cross-functional nature, namely in the form of 1, coordination cost, and 2, calibration. And what I mean by that is the coordination costs in that each team may have their own set of objectives and cadences that at times can conflict with, the other team. So that partnership is extremely important to one level set. The second is calibration, right? And that's where, teams view problems and define KPIs in varying and different ways. And so you need to find out how to manage through those variances in order to achieve those business outcomes. So for example, you might be talking about one specific KPI, and as you dig underneath the hood of how each team defines said KPI, you find that you're speaking a different language. Your intent is the same. You're moving in somewhat of a similar direction. But as you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you realize, oh, we're actually defining these things differently. Our processes are different. Our timing is off. Let's make sure that we come to common grounds and align together.
That's right. Aubrey, I'm sure you've probably at Syncari, you probably see a lot of customers have these same problems, right? What have you seen? Like, how do customers address these type of challenges? It's pretty universal, I think, across companies.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I came from integration before at MuleSoft, where we were solving almost like IT focused delivery gaps, right? Where the pain was really on the IT team for a very long time, even now really, is like, how do we deliver all the technical needs to the business and to the customer? And how do we make these great experiences? What we've seen emerge over time has been this notion of DevOps. And I think that that's actually what's exactly happening in RevOps right now, which is how do we bring the different business units together? And I think Jeff, Rosalyn, and I are all kind of on the same page about this. I think we're seeing this emerge a lot more often in business now, where it just makes a lot of sense. I think I mentioned this earlier today, but the customer doesn't care if they're speaking with sales, marketing, or customer success, right? They just want a great customer experience. If it's disjointed, they have very little loyalty to your brand, right? Like, you have to provide them with a great customer experience. And so how you do that is by bringing all of the data to the right people, making handoffs very simple, and I think we also hear this term of single customer view a lot, customer 360. And I think when we think of that, it's easy to go, well, that's a platform, right? That's a tool. That's Salesforce. That's, my ERP, it's NetSuite, whatever the whole company, look at Tableau, or, I can go on. But I think the problem is that when you look at technology as that single customer view, you're missing the point. It's the data, right? It's like,
Right.
and the problem is that when you have data coming from disparate systems, you have, one system that's saying, this is what we say is the, let's use customer name, for example, or company name. And this is another company name, and those don't match, and they either overwrite the data or they just create duplicates or whatever. And that's a very, very simple, case study there. But this is throughout the entire enterprise, throughout every single field, throughout every, entity.
Yeah.
And it becomes a huge problem. And so what we're finding, and why Syncari existed, was because it, you hear a lot of tools, technology that's helping ops pros unify the data, right? That's been something that's been around for a long time. It's called a data warehouse. But the problem is that you need to transform that data, and you need to have a source of truth of that data, and you need to be able to push that data back out to wherever different teams need it. And that does not have to be in a specific place. It can be in Zendesk and Jira and wherever else. And so that's what we're doing internally here. We've had some really cool, I've had a really exciting opportunity to be able to use Syncari to do that. And I do find that it is very, very different. It's very empowering to be in RevOps. And to be able to build and not feel dependent on, a very technical IT or data team to be, to deliver on the projects that we need, because, our data is all over the place. So I think what's cool, and I'm sorry, this is like a lengthy response, but nobody's asked me, so now I get the platform. But what I think is really cool is that we're able to bring this all together, and we're empowering RevOps now like we've never been able to before. And we feel that pressure now to deliver. It's no longer, I think, what we saw with IT and DevOps, we're now seeing in marketing, sales, customer success, and RevOps ultimately. So it's going to get probably worse before it gets better. And so it's all about finding the right platforms to be able to deliver on the needs of the business and be able to respond in real time.
Yep.
Thanks for asking, Rosalyn.
No, I love that. I love that. And, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about no code in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. And Jeff is much more technical than me. He likes to play in that stuff. I do not. I am straight, don't give me any code. Let me it needs to be native functionality and make it easy.
Curious to know, actually, to that point on no code, there's an interesting thought that I've had recently around how technical ops pros should be. And I guess, like I can code a little bit. I'm a whiz with Excel, right? So like where does like the right profile of RevOps go, especially as someone that wants to be maybe, I think we actually heard in the session earlier today that RevOps might become, is more likely in the future to become a CRO than, a sales executive even now. So it's interesting to hear that like ops is the future. How technical do you feel like they should be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jeff weigh in, but I think you have to have technical know-how, right? I joke about not wanting to do code, and I'm definitely not a coder for sure, but you have to understand how systems work, right? You have to understand integrations, how systems work, workflows, right? You have to understand how to configure and implement a system, right, to support the business, whether that means that you have to leverage native functionality or that means that you have to do some coding on the back end. It's all part, I think, as RevOps continues to progress and our tech stack gets more and more complex, the deeper we're going to get into that realm. I'm a systems person. I actually love working with systems. It doesn't scare me, just like data doesn't scare me, although some days it does. But I'm definitely not a coder. I can't go in the back and start doing anything crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's more situational. My thinking has evolved a little bit on this topic. So for smaller companies that don't have the luxury of building out dedicated teams to analytics or to strategy, you're looking for a one-size-fits-all person who can wear many hats, what I call the team of one. In those situations, you're absolutely going to want to have someone that is technical, and there's varying levels of technicality of expertise that you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
So there are folks who can build from scratch. There are folks who can gather requirements, design functional, project manage vendors. That's technical as well. They don't necessarily know the code. And so those are useful skills. As you move up, as companies mature and start to fragment the needs that they desire from their RevOps teams or their sales ops teams, whatever you might call it, they're probably going to lean more for your strategic advice, more for your operational process expertise, more so than can you configure this module.
Right.
So I think it's very situational. But for early stage companies, I think the team of one is a perfect hire, particularly for certain milestones in those companies' lives, in those companies' life.
Yeah, wearing many hats is very, very real. And I think one thing I feel passionately about, like Excel skills or SQL or something like that, like being able to parse through data. I don't think HTML is like necessarily super important for, I think you can get through your RevOps career without knowing, HTML and CSS, but, there are certain technical skills I do think will accelerate your career just by understanding that business logic and data. So sorry, I recognize that we have 4 minutes left. So I wanted to just kind of wrap up quickly with your, top 3 tips and tricks for early to mid-career ops pros, that want to become strategic and partner as, they think through the go-to-market of the strategy there. So Rosalyn, what do you have? What are your top 3?
Yeah, so I think, specific to data, right? Really being able to leverage the data to become that strategic thought partner. If I had to give 3 tips, I think one, I would say, take a step back, right? Understand your data strategy, right? The who, the what, where, when, why, and how, and make sure you build a solid data infrastructure, right? To support the right data. The other thing I would say is just take the time to understand, again, going back to go-to-market strategy and goals, right? Make sure you understand the business and make sure that you align that to how the data and, more importantly, how the insights from that data will inform the business. And then tip 3, I think, would be, really take the time to dive deep into the data. When you think about moving from being tactical to strategic, that's the time when you really want to look at the data, right? You want to be curious, be inquisitive, right? Ask yourself why the data looks a certain way, why the results look this way, what are those drivers and what are those patterns? Basically, just forget about just reporting the data and start to dive deep into the, what is the data telling me aspect? And I think that's how you start to climb and become more and more strategic, right? The more you empower yourself and understand the business and understand the data, the more value you're going to bring to the business overall.
Yeah. I think storytelling is the most important thing because you can give anyone data, but they can't.
That's right.
Everyone can see data. It's a matter of reading it that it helps the business align and stay focused on the North Star. And then Jeff, what about you? What are your top 3?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll say the first 3 that come off the top of my head. 1, be a problem solver and solve the right problem. There's nothing worse than going out and solving the wrong problem and being told by your stakeholders that's not exactly what I asked for. So thus requires you to have high business acumen and being able to read the room, right? The second thing I'd say is earn trust. Earn trust allows you to take more risk over time in your career. So build credibility, have those early wins, those small wins leading to big wins, and do it often. Third is, be an agent of change. And it's not something you can just look in the mirror and say, I'm an agent of change. You really have to know what impact you're driving and ask, so what?
That's awesome. Well, I really want to thank you both for being here. I do see that, I'm sorry, I didn't check the Q&A tab specifically. I do see that we have 2 questions, but we now have a minute. So I will make sure that we follow up. I guess just because we have a minute, I'm just going to maybe just rapid fire. What are some tools to use real-time data? What are some tools you 2 are using?
Oh, real-time data. Well, I mean, Aubrey, I think you have a lot of knowledge about Syncari.
Yeah.
I would say no code
That's
platform.
my answer. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are using CDPs right now, data warehouses, like BI tools, that kind of stuff. But Syncari kind of combines all of that and also connects into that. That's what I'm using, but I also work here. So I'm happy to show you, Brittany, if you want to see how Syncari works. I am happy to show you what we've built here, but it's been pretty exciting and empowering. I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add with 20 seconds left.
So I deal primarily with the enterprise. Real-time data isn't that important from an external data set perspective.
Right.
From an internal data set, there's a ton of really incredible use cases. So for example, connecting your billing or your product usage data, particularly in PLG, product-led growth environments, those are hugely important. Free trial information, you want to be able to keep track of when trials are going to